Johannesburg Water has requested that its customers must start storing water from yesterday. Essentially, we're supposed to start collecting or storing water to accommodate the planned shutdown scheduled from tomorrow, which is Tuesday the 11th, until Thursday the 14th of July. Now, the shutdown will enable Rand Water, the bulk water supplier, to install isolation valves and upgrade systems at its Ekenhof pump station. For more on this, we're joined by Prof Mike Muller, a professional engineer and visiting adjunct professor at the Wits University School of Governance and Water Institute of Southern Africa. Good morning to you, Prof. Always a pleasure to chat with you, and thank you so much for joining us. Of course, it's not necessarily good news. It's a huge inconvenience to have to sit without water for 3 days, but it is a necessity we can't avoid.
Yes, indeed. Good morning, Cindy, and to your viewers. I hope everyone's warm this morning. In some senses, yes, it's a terrible inconvenience for probably about 1 million people around Johannesburg, but it's arguably good news because for a change, what's happening is some work is being done, maintenance and expansion work, before we need it, rather than waiting for some sort of crisis to emerge and then we suddenly see everyone running around and we don't quite know what's happening. So as I understand what's going on at Rand Water this morning is, or what will start tomorrow morning, is that they are expanding and improving some of their big water connections. Partly, I hope, and I haven't confirmed this with them, so that in future, if there's a breakdown in one side, they'll be able to provide water through another side. Because at the moment, some of us are dependent on simply one pumping station and one pipeline. And if there's a problem there, the whole area is switched off. So planned maintenance, planned expansion, improving what we call the resilience of the system. So if one thing goes off, we can switch something else on. Those are very important things to do. It doesn't help much for the, as I say, probably 1 million or so people in southern and western Johannesburg and a couple of other areas who are going to be without water for 2 days. But at least we've been warned ahead of time.
At least we've been warned ahead of time and we can prepare. We're told to store water for the next 3 days or so. But when you think about it, it's not really practical. It's one thing to have water perhaps for ablution, but you also need water to shower, to cook. How much water can you store over 3 days unless there are contingencies like mobile shower tanks or something? How do we survive in these 3 days?
Yeah. Look, I'm afraid there's quite a lot of South Africans who have to do this all the time because they're never quite sure when their water is going to come. And that's why I'm emphasizing, as I say, it's good news. We are actually running a system looking ahead and trying to fix problems before they happen rather than afterwards. And it is, of course, going to cause some inconvenience. I think people will make their own arrangements. I know I've got a number of 20-litre containers in my flat here in Joburg. One of the things that concerns me, though, is that I'm not sure that everyone who's going to be affected knows they're going to be affected. And just as bad, people who probably won't be affected are sort of panicking and saying, are we also part of this? And, it's a usual problem. We don't seem to manage to get the correct information to the right people. We've seemed to have done that now with electricity and load shedding. We've had a lot of experience. So if you go to Eskom's push, you can find out exactly what time and where the power is going to go off. With Joburg Water, we don't yet have that kind of intelligence available to us. And I think it causes a lot of unnecessary uncertainty and worry. But let's celebrate the fact that for a change, we're doing something before the problem happens, because across the country, usually the problem is we wait until things break down and then there's a panic and running around and a lot of uncertainty and inconvenience. So
yes,
I think
sorry,
we're better
Prof.
off than some of
as
the
you
others.
were saying, to the defense of Rand Water and considering the bulk of water that they have to not only purify but to make sure that it goes to the reservoirs and to our taps is quite a mammoth task and a huge infrastructure that is required to maintain the water. But we are here now now, and ideally you probably would want to almost have a rental car, if I may use the analogy of you taking your car to a mechanic to be serviced, and he says, okay, I'm going to give you a smaller vehicle that is reliable, can take you to point A to B, but we don't have that option when it comes to the Ekenhof maintenance plan, do we?
And that's exactly the issue. The point is, at the moment, we're dependent on one plant and one pipe in certain areas. And what we should be aiming for is to have a system that allows us to switch off one part of the system and switch over to another part. Now, part of what I understand is happening over these 2 or 3 days is a connection between two pipes that hopefully will allow that to happen in the future. But there's no way you can get from where you are if you've got one pipe and you have to connect into it and cut the water for a while. You don't have an alternative. What I think they're doing, which is correct, is giving us advice well ahead of time. They've waited for winter, which is not particularly convenient, but it is the time of year where we don't use nearly as much water as in the hot periods of summer. So, I think they've done what they can. But my sympathies for those affected. And as I say, I'm not even sure whether sitting in the suburb of Ilovo in Joburg, whether I'm going to be cut off or not. And yes. I think that's unfortunate because perhaps people are taking water when they don't need to store it because they are just worried that they might be affected.
We'll have Rand Water on the channel a little bit later and get the clarity there because we just have a list of it's either the south of Johannesburg, Soweto, parts there of Roodepoort, Randburg and Honeydew. But as you said, it might be extensive or it could be even fewer areas that are affected. But Prof, not to hyper-localize the issue, we know that in Hammanskraal or in Tshwane, there were the 9 reservoirs that were affected. We've spoken about the outbreak of the cholera, just in general on the maintenance or lack thereof of the water infrastructure. If you were to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, how far back or behind are we or advanced as a country?
Well, I'm afraid to say that the South African Institution of Civil Engineers, of which I'm also a member, has done an infrastructure report card. And we rated the large cities reasonably good still. I think we gave them a C or towards a C minus. Saying, well, it's just about hanging in there, but it could be better. The rest of the country, the smaller towns, the rural areas, got a D minus and in some cases an E, because we know that systems fail all the time and quite often people go for not just days but go for weeks without water. So our concern as a group of professionals is that we really need to remember that life is not only happening in the cities but particularly in the rural areas and small towns. We really need to improve the quality of operation and maintenance because people often say, oh, we don't have enough infrastructure, whereas the truth is the infrastructure isn't being properly managed and used. You go to a pump station, there are 3 pumps. There's supposed to be 2 working and 1 in reserve. You find only 1 is working. That would be a typical case in many parts of the country. And if you can't maintain your basic equipment, you mustn't complain about the need for new infrastructure. Perhaps you need new management to make sure that basic maintenance is done before the problems emerge rather than after.
And we meant to believe that the problems lie with the municipality in the value chain and not necessarily at your water boards or even your water purification plants. The lack of skill or the bottleneck, if you like, is at municipal level, where sometimes it has to deal with the skill shortage or even that budgets are repurposed for something else and the water infrastructure is neglected. Can you confirm this?
Yes, I think we're well aware that, the Constitution said that municipalities are going to be responsible for water supply. And that means that everything from the water treatment and taking it from the reservoirs and passing it through to the customers is the responsibility of those municipalities. Too many of them haven't put qualified people in place, not because there's not qualified people available, but because they've chosen to put maybe friends, maybe family, who knows, the wrong people are in the wrong jobs and are not able to do the job properly. And then the other problem that you referred to, there's a limited amount of money that's provided by government at national level, mainly for the poor community, to make sure there's enough for them. And for the rest of the community, people need to pay for services. But the money isn't collected even from the people who should be paying. And as you also say, the money is quite often diverted. Instead of being used for water, it's used for other things. It might be used for paying salaries for people who don't have much work to do. We know that that's the case. One of the reasons they don't do work is because there's no equipment and no budget for the materials they need. So we really need better quality of management and use of resources at the local level in those smaller municipalities. Alternatively, we have to relook at this constitutional arrangement. Why are we giving this important job to municipalities that are just unable to do it? And I know that the National Department is looking at ways to try and help improve the quality of management at that local level, but if necessary, to find alternatives to it. Because I think we're getting to the point where if it doesn't work, we're going to have to ask other people to try and do the job properly, because we can't leave people without water.
And another dilemma, Prof, and you can correct me, is the fact that we have to subsidize, as you were saying, the indigent, those who are not able to provide or pay for water services. But it's also putting a heavier tax burden on those that are paying for services, etc. How much, if you were able to give us or paint a picture, are we subsidizing communities, either be it for non-payment culture or those that simply cannot afford?
You know, Cindy, I think I've in fact just published a paper looking at the free basic water program, which was one of the flagship programs of government, which said, and this is in line with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, everyone should have access to water, and affordability shouldn't be a barrier. We can't have households having to choose, do we buy food for the children or do we pay a water bill? Now, the equitable share of revenue, which is what national government pays to municipalities so that they can provide that basic water supply to poor people, there's a strong argument that says it's not enough. It subsidizes maybe 20% of the population. But you know, the terrible thing about South Africa is if you look at our population and its income, probably half of the people of South Africa are living at or even below the poverty line. They really do have to choose every day. Are we going to pay for water or are we going to buy food? And in those cases, we need to make sure that there's enough of a subsidy for that basic water supply. But what happens is that even people who can afford it don't pay, and the people who can afford it and have a good water supply take far more than the basic water supply, and that leaves everyone else short both of water and it leaves the municipality short of money. This is a big problem that we're going to have to fix. Water supply is just a symptom of a rather more serious problem of management in many of our municipalities.
Prof, we're going to leave it there. Thanks indeed for joining us this morning. We hope you are warm where you are. That is Professor Mike Muller, a professional engineer and a visiting adjunct professor from the Wits University School of Governance and Water Institute of South Africa, just reflecting on the pressures on municipality to maintain water supply. As you now know, as of tomorrow, this is Tuesday, the 11th of July until the 14th. On Thursday, certain parts of Johannesburg, and we'll give you details which areas will be affected. There will not be any water supply, but we're told that there are contingencies and JoJo tanks, or in certain areas, be it shopping centres. We'll definitely endeavour to give you all the details as we follow up on this story.